Hello, 2T4s. We're the Frosh Week Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion SubComm, and we're going to present to you a quick overview of a concept we consider to be extremely important at school: sexual and gender diversity. This is one of 3 videos we've created to explore important equity-related topics at school. The other 2 can be found on our YouTube page.
Before we begin, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land on which the University of Toronto is currently located. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. While we may not currently be present on the U of T campus, we continue to benefit from the institutions present on the land.
So what is sexual and gender diversity? You might have heard about the LGBTQ+ community, or maybe some other variation on it, which is an acronym used to represent sexual and gender diversity. In this presentation, we'll be using the acronym LGBTIISQ+. It includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, two-spirit, queer, and more identities such as non-binary, asexual, pansexual, and more. But what do these terms actually mean?
Lesbian is a term used to refer to a person who identifies as a woman who is physically and/or emotionally attracted to other self-identified women. Gay is a term used to refer to a self-identified man who is physically and/or emotionally attracted to other men. Gay is also used as a broad term to describe people attracted to someone of the same gender. Bisexual is a term used to refer to a person who is physically and/or emotionally attracted to people of more than one gender and who identifies as bisexual or bi. There are several terms used to refer to a similar identity, but it is up to the individual themselves to identify how they choose. Transgender or trans is a term used by people who identify with a gender that is different from the gender they were assigned at birth. People whose gender identity falls outside of the gender binary, which is the idea that there are only 2 genders, male and female, may also call themselves trans. Since trans is a word used to describe identity, a person has to identify with the term, believe it's the best way to describe themselves, for it to be applicable. No one else can decide a person is or isn't trans. Intersex describes when a person is born with both male and female sex organs or other sexual characteristics. Some intersex individuals are assigned a gender at birth that they're raised as, which may or may not fit with how they view their gender identity.
Two-spirit refers to a person with both a feminine and masculine spirit living in the same body. It's an important term within some Indigenous cultures, and some Indigenous people use it to describe their sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or spiritual identity. Queer is a broad term that includes all sexual orientations and gender identities within the LGBTIISQ+ community, including those who don't identify with any other identity in LGBTIISQ+. Historically, queer was used as an insult, but it has been reclaimed by the community. However, not all members of the community are comfortable with the word queer, so it's important to make sure before using it. Pansexual refers to a person who is attracted to people of all genders. Non-binary refers to a person who doesn't accept a society that only acknowledges the gender binary of male and female and defines their gender outside of these norms. Asexual refers to a person who experiences low to no desire for sexual activity. Genderqueer refers to a person who identifies as neither, both, or a mix of male and female. Individuals who identify as genderqueer may or may not also identify as trans. Gender fluid refers to a person whose gender identity and gender expression are not static and can shift with time and/or circumstance. These are some of the words that are currently being used by the LGBTQ2S+ community. However, words change all the time, and different communities may choose to use different terms to identify themselves. There are many other identities that are represented as part of the broader LGBTQ+ acronym, but these may be just a few that you hear at U of T. Even though there are lots of terms and labels that many individuals within the LGBTQ+ community identify by, all aspects of gender, sexuality, and romance are on a spectrum. This means that there aren't any truly distinct categories that individuals can be defined by. All of these spectra are separate, so the way an individual identifies on one spectrum is completely unrelated to how they might identify on a different spectrum.
There are many aspects of an individual that fall under spectrums of gender that may or may not relate to each other. Often, people assume that gender is a binary, and that biological gender, gender identity, and gender expression are mostly the same thing, which is not true. Gender identity is one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both, or neither. It involves how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. Beyond socialization by parents, peers, and culture, it is not determined by assigned sex. That is, gender identity may be influenced by societal norms of assigned sex and how it is upheld by other people, but it is not the same thing. Meanwhile, gender expression is how someone outwardly expresses their gender through behavior, style, and/or mannerisms. Someone's gender expression may or may not conform to their gender identity. In other words, don't assume someone's gender identity from their expression.
Biological sex is the term which refers to a number of sexual and reproductive biological factors, including hormones, chromosomes, and genitals. Biological sex can be different from your assigned sex, which is a label given at birth predominantly based on genitalia that typically ignores the other factors that make up biological sex. Most people are assigned male or female, and this is what's put on their birth certificates. When someone's genitals don't seem to fit the typical definitions of male or female, they may be described as intersex. A person's assigned sex may not fully capture the complex biological, anatomical, and chromosomal variations that can occur inside a person's body. Sexuality is another aspect of an individual's identity. Sexual identity determines which gender expressions and identities a person is sexually attracted to, as well as the extent to which the person feels sexual attraction. A person's sexual identity, usually characterized by physical sexual feelings of desire, may or may not align with their romantic identity. Romantic identity determines which gender expressions and identities a person is romantically or emotionally attracted to. Romantic attraction can mean many things. Often, we take it to refer to a feeling of deep emotional and spiritual connection. As such, romantic identity can also be described as a desire for love and/or intimate and emotional relationships with particular genders. It is important to note that an individual's romantic identity may or may not align with their sexual identity. That is, the expressions and identities a person is physically attracted to. Something especially important to consider in everyday life is pronouns. Pronouns are how we refer to people in the third person. In English, these are gendered. As such, the pronouns we use to describe a person must be an accurate reflection of the gender identity they associate with. Some common pronouns are listed below, such as he, him, his, she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs.
Misgendering, which is using the incorrect gender to refer to someone, can be incredibly hurtful. There are some very simple guidelines to use in everyday life so that we can avoid this and encourage an inclusive environment. Don't be afraid to ask. Normalize asking people about their pronouns when you first meet them, and not just people you assume are trans or genderqueer. A simple, "What pronouns do you use?" works just fine, or look to see if someone is wearing a pin with their pronouns on it. Use your own pronouns. Just like you wouldn't assume to know someone else's pronouns, don't assume people know yours. Introduce yourself using your pronouns. For example, I usually introduce myself with, "Hi, my name is James, and I use he, him pronouns." Remember and use pronouns. If someone tells you they use they, them pronouns, use they, them pronouns when referring to them. Use the pronouns that someone asks you to use regardless of their biological sex or gender expression. If you mess up, don't make it a big deal. Mistakes happen, and if you do misgender someone by accident, correct yourself and move on. Long apologies can draw unwanted attention to the situation and make people uncomfortable. Correct someone if they misgender. If another person misgenders someone in conversation, make sure to correct them so they don't repeat their mistake. Simply saying something such as, "Hey, I think that person prefers these pronouns," will work just fine.
What is outing? Outing is something that many LGBTQ+ individuals face on a daily basis. Outing involves exposing someone else's identity without their express informed consent, be it deliberate or accidental. This includes telling others about someone else's identity, even if they share that identity, like telling a gay person that so-and-so is also gay, discussing someone's identity with other people, and speculating about someone's identity to other people, such as speculating about whether or not someone might be transgender. So how do we avoid outing? Respect others' privacy. If someone does not give you express permission to discuss their identity with others, understand that they have a right to privacy, and it is ultimately their decision to disclose their identity to whomever they choose. Ask for consent before speaking about someone's identities. Do not assume that because someone is open with you, they are open with everyone about their identity. Do not assume someone's identity. Remember, gender identity, gender expression, and biological sex are not the same thing, and assuming someone's identity, even correctly, can be incredibly hurtful. Individuals within the LGBTQ+ community face many micro and macroaggressions that are ingrained in our society that we should all be working to dismantle. Many of these are centric on the idea that LGBTQ individuals are a minority that do not need to be accounted for or taken into consideration in everyday life. Heteronormativity is the widespread dominant belief that heterosexuality is the norm. Heteronormativity often results in us assuming that the person we're talking to or referring to is straight unless they explicitly state otherwise. Broadly, it also results in a culture where our media, institutions, and education reflect heterosexuality as the default. Individuals whose gender aligns with their assigned sex are referred to as cisgender. Cisnormativity is the assumption that the person's gender identity matches their assigned sex. Broadly, it also results in a culture where our media, institutions, and education reflect cisgenderism as the default. Often, individuals in the LGBTQ+ community face uncomfortable and inappropriate questions as a result of heteronormativity and cisnormativity. They are usually invasive and violate someone's sense of privacy and reinforce stereotypes to do with cis and heteronormativity. This includes questions about birth name and assigned gender at birth for non-cis individuals, and questions about sexuality for non-hetero individuals. Remember that LGBTQ+ individuals do not owe anyone explanations or justifications for their identity, and that their right to privacy is much more important than satisfying anyone's curiosity. Here's some resources for learning more about sexual and gender diversity at Skule. U of T's Sexual and Gender Diversity Office, LGBTOUT, QueerSphere, Skule's LGBT+ Club, resources for trans people on the SGDO's website, and the Sexual Education Center at U of T.
All right, everyone, thank you for watching. Remember that we have 2 more videos available to watch on our YouTube account, one on anti-racism and cultural sensitivity, and one on building a culture of consent. Make sure to check them out. Have a great Frosh week.